All right, today we go behind the build again we're doing an insider edition with Miguel. Miguel is the DevOps lead at XNET as well as head of network operations. Miguel has spent over 20 years, 2 decades in the mobile network industry, and he's been in the industry since actually the start of 2G. So, Steve, Miguel, you guys want to dig into some background?
Yeah, Miguel, why don't you start off just giving us a couple minute overview of your background? I know you were former head of engineering at TruePhone, and maybe you can tell us what TruePhone is, what you worked on at TruePhone, and then some present day sort of information about you.
Okay, well, guys, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today, and I'm very happy to share some of that background with you guys. So basically, I've been working in the telco businesses since the year 2000, so 23 years ago. Back then, I started more on the field operations domain, where I was actually boots on the ground, building up sites and putting up antennas and optimizing and expanding coverage. Then for 4 or 5 years, I've dedicated myself to the course. Back then, if you recall, there was the birth of the 3G, the UMTS technology. And at the time, I joined the startup business here in Portugal, which was actually the first company to launch UMTS services in Portugal. This in the year 2002. Okay. And then in 2005, approximately, I moved to another operator in Portugal, which is like the second largest mobile operator here, to join their operations and supervision team, which is actually in charge of 24/7 operations for that operator, keep everything running smoothly and managing the alarms and all the network upgrades and all of that. And basically, I stayed there for about 5-6 years until I was invited to join another startup, which this time was TruePhone back in the year 2011. And the goal here was to actually build a global mobile operator, and it was the first time something was done at that scale in terms of having a distributed global core. And during that year and a half, it was actually a huge challenge to get that executed, but we finally launched global services, which are today in operation still. So I've spent a lot of time at TruePhone, basically the last 10-11 years of my career, through a number of different roles, from network operations dude, taking care and building those teams, all the way to the head of engineering responsible for the cloud platform and development tools inside the business. And basically that was what I was doing before I joined XNET, which I'm here, by the way, for like 8-9 months now, responsible for the DevOps part. Also now focusing on the telco side, and that's basically what I do. I just try to play everything that it's technical at XNET at this point.
Awesome.
So you've been part of traditional wireless for over 20 years. You've seen the ins and outs of the industry, but what do you think is the most disruptive approach behind decentralizing the RAN, like the radios, the technologies behind building a mobile network?
Yeah, so when I think about decentralizing the RAN, I think about the possibilities that brings for us as an operator to have to leverage the capability of having our independent builders, partners that work with us to kind of speed up the build out of network in places that previously were not covered by any sort of mobile communications, or places that are badly or poorly covered by the existing mobile operators. And it also gives a huge incentive to people to solve their own coverage issues, because what I've seen over the last 20 years, at least here in my country, which is a small country, and I can see that at least it has a good coverage in terms of mobile communications, but still there are spots that don't have enough coverage. And there's basically no incentive for typical MNO to go out and coverage those black spots because there's not enough traffic there. They don't monetize the infrastructure that they put there, so they typically don't do it. And in the model like the one we're building at XNET, we actually allow people to deploy a radio access network to solve their own problems in the community. And that's something that I believe no one else out there is doing at the moment. So I think that's a huge plus for.
The decentralized RAN it's a great idea, and it's got a lot of power to give people power to fix their own problems. XNET is a mobile neutral host platform. Maybe you can get a little technical in describing how exactly XNET accomplishes that. And I know XNET's using a different tech stack with 3GPP and standards compliance as a key part of that tech stack. But maybe you can dive a little bit deeper because you're very close to that part of things, and just describe the process of becoming a neutral host and what's required of the network.
Yeah. So being a neutral host is mostly about not having I would say a preference or a differentiation for any kind of roamer that roams in our network, right? So for instance, when we're roaming in someone else's network, typically they have their own customers. They obviously want to prioritize the experience for their own customers. So there are cases where roamers, inbound roamers that come from other operators, are not prioritized for service in those networks, and therefore they are subject to a different quality of service or poorer service because of that. So being a neutral host means that any subscriber for any network from any original network roaming in our network is treated the same way. So the same class of service, the same access to the different services that we offer, so without any kind of differentiation. The network itself, it's as you mentioned, the 4.5G network, which follows all the standards, and that's what allows us to interwork properly with any MNO out there, because all of that is standardized. And we're deploying our core mainly with cloud native technologies. We want to make sure that we are future ready or future proof, that we can scale out really quick when the demand arises. And that we basically can adopt all the best practices and latest technologies that are being built today, not only for the web, things like Kubernetes and all the technology stacks that were developed over the last few years, and have allowed companies to reach like a global scale as we see today. And we want to bring in those practices into the telco world quicker, okay? Because 5G already allows to adopt some of those best practices and allow to adopt the tools that are being used out there in the software industry for like a decade now. But it's still very slow to move, So if you go to a typical telco operator and say, "Oh, you guys are already using like cloud native technology," and they say, "Yeah, sure we are." Okay, show us what technology do you have? And you go and see, and they are still using stuff that it's provided by their typical telco vendors, which are still very conservative in terms of how things are developed, how they are operated, how things are deployed. It's still very conservative in the telco world. And what we're trying to do is step ahead of that and try to be more nimble, more effective, more flexible, and react faster to the market needs than we would be able to do otherwise, if we had to depend on those third parties for having some of the technology and innovation that we want to put in place.
Gotcha. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges? Because in a sense, an XNET cluster may be the more technologically advanced, but it still has to integrate with some of these dinosaurs. So where do the challenges come from?
Yeah, so as long as we respect the interfaces, the interconnection points, the standards, the protocols, the specifications that are defined in the norms that are followed by these operators, typically are things like 3GPP specs, ITU specs. Some things are also defined by the GSMA. So as long as we maintain compliance and compatibility with those interfaces, we can basically do whatever we we need or want inside our own core, right? At the edge, where we integrate with those carriers, we look exactly the same as any other MNO. We'll have the same integration points. We'll support the same set of services on the mobile core. We'll be able to obviously maintain a seamless experience for the subscribers of those operators that come and roam in our network, and that's all part of being the neutral host that we want to be. So taking advantage of these technology enablers to make sure we are faster, quicker, more flexible to adapt to the needs of our customers and of the market. On the other hand, still appear as a well-behaved MNO from the outside, so that we can be seen by the industry as a roaming partner that can be trusted, and obviously that offers a service that is valuable for them and for their customers.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
No, yeah, I think Miguel hit two really core points there. I think one of which in our last pod, Steve, Sal alluded to also, that one, that innovation cycles in kind of large behemoth, these dinosaur operator networks, I think we're seeing it with 5G. They're not as nimble. They can't move as fast. So it's going to take them much longer. So I think there's a big edge that decentralizing RAN has there to already kind of have these usable clusters in place. Like if it's already there, like why are they going to go invest $2-3 million a year just to stand up something small in San Francisco? It doesn't make sense. And then the second point about neutral host, obviously complying with all the industry standards, but I think XNET's value prop is right there, right? Neutral host, period. We're not here to sit in bed with one carrier. We're going to be roaming with all four carriers. We're going to be roaming with MVNOs. So like, it's not just one carrier. It's going to be multiple parties paying us top dollar to use our disruptive tech. So it's exciting stuff.
Right on. Miguel, I've got a question about from a deployment perspective. So you lived in that world where you were setting up cell phone towers, getting them online. And we have the decentralized RAN. So it's sort of a grassroots community-driven initiative to build the infrastructure. From your point of view, from your perspective, you made this point, we look like a well-behaved MNO because we attach by all the usual standard compliant ways. Now, but we have a community-driven grassroots approach. Can you describe problems that might pop up with this sort of grassroots decentralized RAN? And maybe give some advice to people who are deploying such that they can make certain choices or deploy with a certain degree of quality to prevent future problems. Like what's the best deployment and where do problems pop up in your perspective?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question, Steve. So basically, building a RAN is not something that can be done like in the Far East. There are a bunch of rules that obviously have to be followed, not only from a regulatory point of view, but also from a network design and network operation point of view. Because obviously we need to make sure that the network is optimized for coverage, but also for quality, that we minimize interferences, that we cover the best locations that is possible, where there's obviously more users needing to access services, more bandwidth is required. So all of that is important to ensure that we're building quality into the network and not just having the radios up radiating. That's in itself, there's little value in that, because I can tell you that some of the biggest problems I faced in the past, back in the days when I was working on the RAN side, was interference, was poor quality in terms of cell signal in certain locations, and it was always like this big puzzle to try to optimize all the cells to make sure that you get to that sweet spot where the performance is maximized while you don't, and you optimize the cost as well, because you don't want to put obviously a lot of capital into building a bunch of cell towers that then don't have enough traffic to monetize themselves. And I think that in our space, that's going to be critical as well. Although we're decentralizing into our partners, our builders, this ability to add more cells into our radio network, but there will be a point where we'll obviously have to start working more cooperatively together to ensure that those radio sites are at the best possible locations with the best possible directions, tilts, power. All of that will have to be optimized so that we can collectively harness all the value that can be harnessed from a network setup like this.
Yeah, certainly that could be a problem down the road. You know, there's a sense of wanting to declare victory because a lot of radios are in a certain area, but they could be doing counterproductive behaviors just by causing interference or not utilizing the spectrum the best way as possible. Yeah, that's a challenge for us. You know, clusters are fundamentally a coordination problem amongst a bunch of people. So
yeah, and today there are already technologies that can smooth that. Things like self-organizing networks can help a lot here. But still, when it comes to physical changes on the sites, we'll always have to rely on people to make the best installation that it's possible and fine-tune that installation with us to make sure that it's as good as it can be.
Okay. I mean, I have a few more things I'd like to talk about, Miguel. Obviously, don't mean to throw any shade or hate towards any other project here, but I think we should bring up maybe Magma, the infamous Magma, and just talk about why it's not feasible, why it's a fever dream.
Yeah. So I, to be totally honest, I'm not really into Magma, the technical details, but I've obviously heard a lot about it over the years, and I think that probably the biggest drawback is the fact that it's a data only core, and therefore doesn't provide voice services or the typical text service, which apparently after all this time people are still used to. It's incredible to to imagine that with all the text apps that there are today out there, people still use SMS, but it's wrong. And then the use case of authenticating via an SMS. But yeah, it's still a requirement. People still need SMS, and people still need voice calls. And if a network is not able to support those kinds of services, it will hardly be a choice against a typical MNO. You know, people still need those traditional telco services, and Magma is not supporting those services, so it can be used for other kind of data offloading use cases, but not as a neutral host empowering technology. You know.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, people don't use SMS for two-factor authentication, please. Please get rid of that as fast as possible.
Stop depositing money into your bank, I guess.
Yeah, with SMS. Miguel, to expand on that, I'm curious your thoughts here. So you spoke a lot about standards compliance and how there's definitely a prescribed way of interfacing from network to network. Now, when you say like no supporting SMS, no support of voice, I mean, I expect SMS and voice is probably baked into those standards at a very, very low level. Like it's sort of implied or assumed across these standards. Can you just give us a sense of the way these standards are structured, like what they pertain to, that kind of thing? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. Well, we have to look in hindsight and see how the mobile technology actually evolved. You know, because first purpose of having a mobile telecommunications network was actually to support voice. That was the thing, having voice. And then it evolved a little bit, and you got SMS on top of it. And that was actually a very profitable add-on to the network, because operators made a huge amount of money with SMS with basically zero cost. It's just using signaling channels that are free. for them. They are already out there, so it's just a very good way to monetize the network. And then we had this data add-on that came first with GPRS and Edge and the HSDPA, so HSCDA, which was basically like a data over network. You had like some voice time slots that were used to carry on bits like they do for voice, but instead of being encoded voice was actually bits from data packets, but they were carried on the same kind of voice channel. And that's why it was so slow. Like the channel was 64 kilobytes per second, right? So you had some encoding there, and that resulted in very small data speeds. And then 3G came along to solve the data problem, right? We really needed more speed. So 3G came with a promise to bring 2 megabytes per second of speed. And to do that, there was actually a new core that was plugged to the side of the 2G core, right? So the 3G evolution was actually like a packet core that was placed alongside the voice core. And then we got two domains, the circuit switching domain, the packet switching domain. But it was still a separate thing, You were using core on one side, voice on the other side. And the promise of 4G was kind of integrate all of that. And for the first time, the first technology we had that was actually supporting voice over data. So the role switched, from data over voice or over voice channels to voice over data, in that case with voice over LTE on 4G. So basically the core voice network kind of started fading away, to give way to the packet core as the main mobile telecommunications core. And 5G actually takes that step even further, where now we actually have a data-centric core, where everything is dealt as data, and voice just happens to be one of the services that is carried on that core, right? And that actually makes it a lot easier. Dealing with voice as just another data use case, like packets, it makes it a lot easier to reutilize that data, that core capability to carry all other types of data and support all other kinds of services, and I think that's where where we finally close that transition from all the way from the start of the mobile telecommunications to the data-centric core. It's closed right now with 5G.
Got it. Yeah. So the application that came the latest, which was data, has now become the predominant paradigm, and voice SMS is just lumped into data streams. So back to the standards compliance sort of thing and its support of voice. Is it possible to be standards compliant and not support voice and SMS? Is that because they're all run over data? Okay.
Yeah, sure. We can have, or a mobile operator can have a 5G core with no voice service. So now in 5G, they're calling voice over new radio, which is basically like the evolution of VoLTE, but this time over the 5G radio access network. But that's still like an add-on that you put on your 5G core. You can still have a 5G core, which is data only, or if you want to use voice services, you have to put some more building blocks on top of that 5G core, things like the IMS that will be able to support your traditional telephony, that supports number portability, that supports then integrations with other legacy networks, like the PSTN, which some people still use at their homes, or other kinds of voice networks that are out there. And voice-centric services, like the IP telephony and stuff like that. And for that, you still need to build a voice core, which in this case is the IMS. But it's totally possible to have a 5G core without it.
Got it.
But still focusing only on providing data services.
Yeah, I'm still getting a greater and greater appreciation for the sea of acronyms that you're throwing out there.
And, sorry about that.
No problem. I'm sure it's unavoidable in the telecom world. There's so many variants and there's so many changes, and everything needs to be backwards compatible. Yet the standard changes year after year. So
yeah, that's really typical, Steve. I've worked with a lot of people over the years that came from other industries, and more recently, I worked with a lot of people from the software development industry, and they were always puzzled with all the acronyms that these telco guys were throwing in every sentence. So.
Well, that's
something.
That's XNET. XNET is wielding the acronyms, the power of acronyms, to empower people. You can use XNET without actually understanding each and every acronym, what it means, which is the beauty of it. Sean, maybe one more question and bring us home. Coming up on a half an hour, give or take.
No, that was really insightful, Miguel. Steve, as you said, as many acronyms as you want, but at the end of the day, people are going to be able to use us without knowing them, hopefully. But it's great, man. And Miguel, it's great to have you, man. Learn a lot about mobile networks and how this industry works. And I guess we're slowly maturing, right? We almost have to climb these ladders. It's follow industry standards, as you said, and then maybe get access to some priority licenses so we don't have to deal with the interference problem. We don't get shut down. And then finally, maybe we'll have that, across the world moment when RAN is just decentralized everywhere. But
yeah, and I think that's going to be a very exciting future. And I'm pretty sure that XNET will do its part to accelerate it, because someone always has to do something to change things, and the telco world is definitely something that needs to be changed for the better, and we're here to kind of accelerate that transition.
Love it. Great.